My daughter-in-law planned to sell my beach house. I sold it next morning, along with the one she thought was hers. Have you ever given so much to your family that you forgot you even had a name? There was a moment, just one, but it burned itself into my memory. I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a plate of dinner I had cooked, and no one had set a place for me. They said it was a mistake. But when you've been overlooked long enough, silence starts to sound intentional. That was the day I stopped waiting to be invited in and decided to open a door for myself. You see, I didn't scream. I didn't slam anything. I just quietly sold the house out from under them. And if you're thinking, she what? Stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about real estate. It's about a woman who remembered who she was, long after everyone else forgot. So please, before we go any further, subscribe and stay with me. Because no elder should ever be treated like background noise in their own home. My name is Alberta Quinn. I'm 73 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant never taking up too much space. I cooked, I cleaned, I held my tongue even when it trembled with truth. I handed down heirlooms and tucked away disappointments. And somewhere along the way, my family stopped asking what I wanted. They just assumed I'd always be there, quiet and convenient. This isn't a sob story. It's a wake-up call. Because one day, I realized that the love I gave so freely was being mistaken for obligation. That's when things started to change. I'm telling you this not because I'm special, but because I'm not. There are women just like me on every street. Maybe one lives next door to you. Maybe she's the one who used to babysit your kids, or who brings banana bread to every church potluck and never asks for a thing in return. And maybe, just maybe, she's quietly being erased in her own home. This story isn't about revenge. It's about respect. It's about waking up from a lifetime of self-sacrifice and asking, what do I want now? So I invite you to lean in close. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. Because if you've ever felt invisible in the place you once built with love, you're not alone. This is my story, but it might be yours too. I used to think the wind from Bar Harbor never changed, until the day it carried my daughter-in-law's plans to sell the house right past my kitchen window. It was subtle. At first, just a voice, too sharp for the sea breeze, floating in from the porch. She was pacing again. I didn't even have to look. I could feel her footsteps through the floorboards. Liquidating beach property, she said into her Bluetooth headset, like she was talking about a pile of unused furniture, not the house I built my life in. I sat still at the kitchen table, tea cooling in my hand, the same chipped mug my husband once drank from, the one with the little blue lighthouse on it. Funny how you hold on to things when people go. The mug, the smell of cinnamon, the sound of the clock ticking louder when the house goes quiet. Behind me, the holiday cards sat in a neat stack, each one addressed, each one never mailed. I'd written them 3 days ago, thinking I'd send them early this year, but I couldn't seem to let them go. Like I knew something was coming that would make the words inside feel dishonest. It's strange how silence tells you more than noise. Caleb didn't say anything at breakfast. He never does when Savannah's around. She fills the air like perfume, something expensive, a little too sweet, and hard to wash off. That morning, I walked into town like I always did. The wind bit my cheeks, and the sun barely made it over the edge of the horizon. Bar Harbor was quieter than usual, like the whole town was holding its breath. Leaves gathered in wet piles near the curb. The smell of salt mixed with old pine needles reminded me of Thanksgiving long gone, when Caleb was little, and my husband still fixed everything with duct tape and a joke. At the Bay's Edge Cafe, Chloe greeted me with her usual smile. "Morning, Miss Quinn. The usual." I nodded. I didn't need the menu. Some people find comfort in variety. I find it in routine. 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, tea, always tea. Eloise slid into the seat across from me, her scarf unraveling like a soft ribbon down her coat. Cold enough to freeze the smile off a preacher this morning, she said, tucking her gloves into her coat pocket. We talked like we always did. About the weather, the tourists who left too late, and the kind of pies people used to bring to church bake sales when community still meant something. She asked about Caleb, and I gave her the version I thought wouldn't sting. He's tired, I said. Working a lot, I suppose. She didn't buy it. I wouldn't have either. And Savannah? She asked, sipping her coffee. I looked out the window. She's efficient. Eloise raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. That's the thing about friends your age. They don't force the truth out of you. They wait for it to rise on its own. When I got home, the house felt colder, not in temperature, but in presence. Savannah was in the sunroom, talking fast again. I heard her through the door. Finally getting it signed over? No, she won't argue. She's sentimental, not stupid. I didn't interrupt. I just stood in the hallway, hand resting on the back of the dining chair like it could hold me upright. Later that afternoon, she came into the kitchen with a stack of documents. She smiled too easily, like she rehearsed it in the car. Alberta, she said, placing the papers on the table between us. We just need to streamline ownership for tax purposes. I filled everything out. You just need to sign. I didn't answer her right away. I looked down at the documents, her handwriting in the margins, tabs where I was supposed to sign, a sticky note that said, easy, with a smiley face. I'd spent my whole life reading between lines, shelving stories that weren't mine, but holding them just the same. I could tell when something was being erased, quietly, deliberately. She leaned on the kitchen counter like she owned it, like she had already measured the cabinets for demolition. It's really just a formality, she added, brushing a blonde strand behind her ear. You'll still be here for the holidays, of course. That, of course, sat in the room like a fog. You know, it's not just about us, she continued. Caleb's under a lot of stress. This house, it's too much. It would be better if we consolidated. One less thing to manage. The words were careful, polished, the kind she probably used with clients, families who didn't know better, who trusted easily, who hadn't buried a husband in the same plot they once planted tomatoes together. She mistook my silence for confusion. I've already contacted someone about the listing, she said, as if to sweeten the deal. Off market, no pressure, but we got a great offer. Split it 3 ways. You'd be surprised what people pay for water views. That was when I saw the Thanksgiving invitation on the counter. Not addressed to me. Just the Blakes. Not even Quinn. No return address, like I'd been edited out in pencil, barely visible beneath. There was a time when I believed being quiet meant being respected. That silence was a kind of grace. But silence, I've learned, is only golden to those who profit from it. She tapped the table gently. Just look these over when you get a chance. I nodded, slow and polite, and reached for the papers. My hand didn't shake. You can use my pen, she said, holding it out. I didn't take it. I smiled, faint but steady. I'll read them carefully. She didn't notice the shift in my voice, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. When she left the room, I sat for a moment, not in shock, just stillness, the kind that comes before the wind changes. The house creaked the way it always did when the tide pulled back, as if it knew what was coming. I got up, walked to the hallway, opened the drawer beneath the hall mirror, the one with the worn brass handle. Inside, my husband's will, his glasses, and the small wooden box he kept old letters in. I slid the documents inside, stacked them neatly, and locked the drawer. Then I placed the key in the ceramic bowl on the mantel, just beside the photo of him in his fishing vest, smiling like he knew a secret. Savannah wouldn't look there. People like her rarely noticed things that didn't sparkle. Outside, the sky was already dimming, even though it was barely afternoon. The gulls were louder now, circling above as if sensing something in the air. I stood in the living room a while longer, eyes on the horizon where Bar Island sat quiet and indifferent. There was a shift in me then, not anger, not yet. Just a pull, a slow, deliberate turning inward. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I wasn't going to sign anything. The house used to feel larger when it was full of noise. Caleb running down the hallway barefoot, the dog barking at the waves outside, Frank's laugh rumbling through the walls. Now, it only echoed softly when I walked across the floorboards. I spent that afternoon folding linens that no one would use, guest beds made, pillowcases smoothed. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away, and I still held on to the absurd hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would ask me what dish I planned to make. Not that I'd heard from Caleb, not even a call to say he got the invitation. I found myself staring at the mantel longer than usual. The photo of our first Christmas in this house. Caleb had a red bow tie on, sticky from candy canes. I remembered Frank trying to keep the fire going while Caleb kept throwing pine cones into it, laughing like it was magic. I dusted that frame 1,000 times, but I did it again anyway. Slower, as if I could wipe away the part where things started to change. Outside, I saw Eloise out front, pruning her shrubs in that old yellow windbreaker she wore every year since 2012. I opened the window just enough to hear her hum something that sounded like Patsy Cline. I nearly called her, but something in me hesitated. Maybe I didn't want to say it aloud just yet. Maybe naming it would make it real. That my daughter-in-law thought she could erase me with a line on a form. I closed the window, put the kettle on. The whistle pierced the room like it was scolding me for being so still. Later, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, the cool air sharp with salt. I watched a couple stroll the beach hand in hand, their dog bounding ahead of them. They looked like they belonged in one of Savannah's glossy brochures. Sunlight hit them just right. I wondered if they had parents, or if they had already turned their parents into paperwork. A breeze lifted the corners of the papers still on my kitchen table. I didn't rush to catch them. Let them flutter a little. Let them feel unstable. It was strange how easy it was to vanish in your own life, to be present, but out of frame. That night, I stayed up later than usual, rereading one of the old mystery paperbacks Frank used to love. I couldn't tell you the plot. I just liked the way the pages sounded when I turned them, like proof I was still here, still choosing. You can't misplace a deed, not when someone else has already made a copy. The folder was back in my lap again, same smooth edges, same yellowing paper I'd handled 12 times. But this time, I noticed something new, a faint smear of lipstick on the edge of one corner. Not mine. A week had passed since Savannah slid those pre-filled forms across the table like she was offering a free trial I could cancel later. She hadn't mentioned them again, but she didn't have to. The air in the house had shifted. My coffee cup had been moved from its usual spot in the cabinet. The family photo on the stair landing, the one where Caleb was still missing his front tooth, had vanished. Savannah called a household finance meeting Tuesday morning. Not with me, of course. I only knew it was happening because I walked past the closed den door and heard her explaining deductions and market value to Caleb like she was reading off a cue card. They were there for an hour. I baked pumpkin muffins just to have an excuse to walk by twice. No one asked me in. Later, the smell of cinnamon still clung to my sleeves as I walked the 2 blocks down to town hall. It had gotten colder, the kind of cold that pinched your skin under your collar. Bar Harbor was starting to wrap itself in plastic snowflakes and raffia bows. Main Street storefronts wore orange and gold like polite smiles. Everything is trying too hard. The woman at the clerk's desk had gray roots and a holiday pin on her sweater. When I gave my name, she blinked twice, typed slowly, and glanced at me in a way that felt too kind. "I'm just checking on our property file," I said, trying not to look at the stack of turkey-themed brochures by her elbow. She slid the manila folder across. "These were requested last week. You're the owner, right?" "I am." I opened the file. There it was, my name, Frank. And then newer copies, one with blue highlighter and notations, a line sketched along the back porch with the word expand circled twice. I didn't say anything, just closed the folder, handed it back, and thanked her. Outside, the wind bit harder. I walked to the library, the old one I used to manage just for the quiet. The heating was still temperamental, smelled of wood polish and memory. Mrs. Talcott, the new manager, offered me tea in a chipped cup that used to be mine. I sat near the biographies, fingers curled around warmth, staring at shelves I once knew like the back of my hand. For a minute, I thought about asking if there were any books on eviction law, but decided against it. Eloise was already at the diner when I arrived. She always beat me to the corner booth. This time, she was fiddling with a crossword and sipping from a mug with a chip in the rim, her favorite one. We talked about nothing for a while. The weather, the new holiday lights. Then, over the clink of cutlery, she said, "Did I ever tell you about my sister's place down in Wells?" I shook my head. She lost it. Not to illness, not to age, to her son-in-law. Slipped papers in with her medical bills. She signed things she didn't even read. They moved her into a condo and flipped the house before she even unpacked her suitcase. I stirred my tea slower. And her daughter? Didn't say a word, just watched. I looked up at the TV mounted in the corner. A commercial played, kids dancing in turkey costumes, promoting the Thanksgiving Day parade. It felt like someone was mocking us with sequins. Eloise didn't push. She just tore a corner off her muffin and set it aside for the birds. That was her way, leaving breadcrumbs for the world, never demanding anyone follow them. Back home, the house felt quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. Caleb had gone into town for errands. Savannah was in the sunroom on a video call, pacing barefoot over the rug I brought back from our anniversary trip to Boothbay. I could hear her laughing into her headset. We'd knock down this wall, open up the space. Ocean views, instant offer. I walked past her like she was invisible. If she noticed, she didn't show it. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer again. The one with Frank's glasses. His will was still there, crisp and unread, like a book someone never got around to finishing. I remembered when he first wrote it, how proud he'd been to include clauses that protected the house and made sure I'd never be forced to sell without my consent. I wondered if Caleb had ever read it all the way through, or if he let Savannah summarize it for him, like she did most things. I took the deed out, the real one, not the photocopy with the highlighter and question marks. Then I called Harry Kravitz. He picked up on the second ring. "Alberta, been a while." "Too long," I said. "You still keep that dusty office above the tailor shop?" He chuckled. "Still there, and still dusty." "I'd like to come by." He didn't ask why, just said, "I'll put the kettle on." It took me 10 minutes to walk there. The air was thick with fog, curling between the pine trees like smoke. Bar Harbor always looked older in November, like an old friend in a wrinkled coat, still familiar, just slower. Harry's office hadn't changed since Frank and I had him draft our first will. Same leather chair, Same typewriter, same photo of his wife on the shelf. She'd been gone 10 years, but he still talked to her portrait when he forgot things. I handed him the folder. He opened it slowly, reading through each page like it might vanish if he blinked too fast. "You want to file a dispute?" he asked gently. "No," I said. "Not yet." He looked up. "I want to talk about selling." His brow furrowed. "Just the guest house?" I shook my head. "All of it." The papers were signed by 9 o'clock a.m. By noon, the only thing Savannah owned was her surprise. The pen was heavier than I expected. Silver-bodied, smooth, not mine. Mrs. Travers had handed it to me with the kind of reverence one might offer a relic. "Take your time," she said, though she already had the blue tags ready, pages bookmarked, witness lines dotted. I didn't take my time. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish and warm dust. The heater in the corner let out a wheeze every so often, like it resented the cold outside. I sat beneath a photo of the harbor from 1957, boats docked in orderly rows, snow dusting their decks. A simpler time. Or maybe just better at hiding what people wanted from one another. Jenna Travers was precise. Not cold, not warm. She respected quiet and didn't fill it. Kravitz sat beside me, reading each page again, even though we both knew the terms by heart now. "No one can reverse this," he'd told me earlier, back at his office. "You understand that?" I had nodded. The deed was mine. The house had been mine before Savannah ever met Caleb. Frank made sure of that. Premarital inheritance. Protected. Locked. I signed the final line. The one where they always leave a little too much space for your name. "Would you like a copy for your records?" Jenna asked. "No," I said. "Just send them to the buyer and have Mr. Kravitz forward the notice tomorrow." "Tomorrow's Thanksgiving." "Exactly." She looked at me for a second, the way someone might study a painting and realize it was hung upside down the whole time. Outside, the flurries had started. Not heavy, just enough to brush the tips of my wool coat as I stepped off the stoop and walked toward Bay's edge. Same path I always took. But today it felt different. Like I was moving through the final pages of a chapter no one knew I'd been writing. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and espresso. The booths were half full. Tourists in puffer jackets, old couples sharing pie, the usual crowd. Janet, the server, spotted me and waved. "Morning, Miss Quinn. The usual?" I nodded. "Cappuccino, extra foam. No muffin today." I sat by the window, where condensation traced quiet trails down the glass. Across the street, Maine was dressed in autumn, hay bales, scarecrows, orange string lights blinking softly in the fog. I watched people pass, gloves tucked under arms, shopping bags bumping hips. I didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the right word. I just felt level, like the floor under me had steadied. Savannah had mistaken silence for surrender. She always did. I finished my coffee slowly. The foam had settled, leaving faint rings along the inside of the mug. I traced them absently with my finger. Across the room, a young couple argued in whispers. Something about missed flights, rental cars, mashed potatoes. I barely noticed. My eyes kept drifting toward the door, watching each person walk in with that mix of cold breath and tired cheer. It was almost noon when I saw her. Savannah didn't storm in at first. She moved fast, yes, but not enough to cause a scene. Not yet. She was holding something white and stiff in her hand. A long envelope. Corner crumpled. Her coat was unzipped, hair wind-blown, mouth tight like she'd bitten down on a lemon and forgotten how to let go. She spotted me before I even had a chance to pretend not to see her. Her boots struck the tile hard. 1, 2, 1, 2. She reached the table and slammed the envelope down. "What the hell is this?" I looked up, met her eyes, and smiled gently. It's a receipt. She didn't sit, just stared, blinking once, then again, like trying to find words inside her mouth, but choking on every one of them. The cafe had fallen silent. Janet paused mid-pour behind the counter. Someone dropped a spoon. I didn't take anything from you, Savannah, I said, voice steady. I just took back what was always mine. Her eyes narrowed. You blindsided us. No, I said. You stopped seeing me. That's different. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came. Just that breathy sound people make when they run out of clever. She turned to leave, quick, sharp, but then paused when the door swung open again. Eloise stepped in, brushing snow off her shoulders. She took one look at Savannah's face, then at me. Happy Thanksgiving, Alberta, she said brightly. Looks like you finally gave yourself a gift. The snow kept falling in fine, slow flakes, as if the sky itself couldn't decide whether to commit to winter or keep pretending it was still autumn. I sat there long after Savannah left the diner, her perfume still hanging like static in the air behind her. The envelope she'd slammed onto the table still sat near my empty cappuccino cup, unopened and untouched. I didn't need to read it again. I had lived every line of it in my head a dozen times over the last week. Outside, the wind stirred the corner of Main Street, brushing Thanksgiving banners against lampposts and rustling the brittle wreaths in store windows. Bay's Edge Cafe had quieted again, the lunchtime crowd tapering off. Eloise had left with a warm smile and a glance that told me she knew more than she said. She always did. That kind of knowing didn't come from gossip. It came from years, from surviving more holidays than you care to count, from losing things that mattered and learning not to flinch when something else slips away. I didn't go home right away. I walked, not fast, not anywhere in particular. I just let the cold nip at my cheeks and creak in my knees, let my boots find the old sidewalk lines I used to trace with my son when he was 5 and thought dandelions were magic. The town hadn't changed much, not physically, but the spaces felt more hollow now, like a picture someone had drawn in too much detail and then erased the people out of. Everywhere I looked, Thanksgiving crept into corners, paper turkeys in the pharmacy window, canned cranberry sauce stacked like ammunition at Grover's Market. I passed the library, the one I used to run to, the one where I shelved books by heart and knew which teenager was pretending to research and which one was hiding from their parents. The lights were on. Through the frosted glass, I could see Mrs. Bell, the new librarian, fussing with a display. I didn't go in. That part of my life was folded, packed, placed high on a shelf. Sometimes I miss it. Sometimes I didn't. I found myself at the town pier, the wind sharper now, cutting through the wool of my coat like a whispered dare. From here, I could see the outline of Bar Island and the shoreline that once held everything I'd worked for. The house, the guest cottage, the tiny shed that once doubled as a writing nook when Harold thought he had a novel in him. All gone. Sold, but not lost. Loss is when someone takes something from you. This wasn't a loss. This was a choice. The truth is, I hadn't wanted to sell. Not really. Not in my bones. That house was full of ghosts, but they were mine. The click of Harold's slippers down the hall. The smell of burnt coffee when Caleb tried to make breakfast for my birthday that year. We had no money but plenty of hope. I wasn't letting go of memories. I was letting go of their misuse, of their rebranding as leverage in someone else's game. The beach house wasn't home anymore. The minute Savannah started calling it an asset, it became something else, a prize, a transaction, something she felt entitled to manage, reshape, flip for more than she ever put in. That's when I knew it had to go, because no one who ever truly lived in that home would call it inventory. I thought of Caleb, not with bitterness, but with the dull ache of old bruises that weather can still find. He hadn't fought for me, hadn't even looked up when Savannah passed the forms across the table. Maybe he thought I was too old to fight back. Maybe he didn't think at all. Maybe, like me once upon a time, he thought being quiet was the same as being kind. But I was learning, belatedly, stubbornly, that silence doesn't always serve kindness. Sometimes it only serves convenience. When I finally turned back toward my temporary rental, a small cabin just beyond the edge of town, I felt lighter, not triumphant, not vindicated, just intact, still me. Not the version Savannah tried to redraw in pencil, light enough to erase, but the full inked one, curled pages and all. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. I didn't know what that meant this year. There wouldn't be turkey at the old table, or cranberry sauce in the little glass bowl Harold insisted on using, but maybe there would be quiet, maybe even peace, and maybe, just maybe, I'd bake a pie. Not because anyone expected it, but because I could. Because the deed was done. And I was, for the first time in a long while, mine again. Savannah always said the beach house had good bones. I suppose that's why it hurt more when she realized she'd never live in it. Thanksgiving morning came in quiet, like it knew better than to announce itself too loudly. The mist rolled low over Bar Harbor, softening the lines of rooftops and wreaths that had appeared overnight. Bells from the small church downtown echoed gently through the fog, spaced wide enough to feel like breathing. I had already been up for hours, sipping lukewarm coffee in the lounge of the little inn I checked into 2 nights ago. No one else had stirred yet. The fire in the hearth gave off more light than heat, and I didn't mind. I wasn't cold anymore. From the window, I could see the edge of the guest house, just a glimpse between pine branches and a crooked fence that still hadn't been fixed. It looked smaller from a distance, more fragile, like a painting of something that had once been real. The Boston couple hadn't moved in yet, but the locks had been changed, the furniture cleared out, the garage swept clean of the items Savannah once stored like claims to territory. What was left behind was simple, quiet. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring once, then twice. On the third buzz, I picked it up. "Mom?" Caleb's voice came through with a stammer of wind on his end. Are you home?" I didn't say yes or no. I just waited. We came to get some things from the guest house. Savannah said she left some boxes. But the door..." He paused. "It won't open." I sipped my coffee slowly. "That's because it's not ours anymore, Caleb." There was silence. The kind of silence that stretches like rubber, taut and awkward, waiting to snap. "You sold it?" "Yes. But you didn't say anything." "I didn't think I needed to." I let my words land like a feather on stone, soft but definite. He didn't speak again, just the faint rustle of him shifting the phone from one hand to the other. "She's upset," he finally said, low and half apologetic. "She thought we had time." Savannah thought a lot of things. I didn't wait for more. I ended the call gently, the way you'd close a book that no longer belongs on your nightstand. It didn't matter what she thought. Not anymore. By noon, I walked back to Bay's Edge Cafe. I knew Savannah would come. She didn't do silence well, and she especially didn't do surprise. Sure enough, when I opened the door, she was already seated by the window, stirring a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Her eyes met mine like a flint meeting stone. "You made your point," she said flatly. "I didn't come to make a point," I replied. She scoffed. "You went behind our backs, sold everything out from under us." "And for what?" "For peace," I said. She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound that didn't reach her eyes. You think this is peace? You just destroyed any chance we had of rebuilding, of growing the property. I sat across from her, careful not to match her tone. You can't lose what was never yours. Her jaw tightened. Outside, a man across the street paused with a box of bakery goods, watching us through the window. I wondered if he knew who we were, if he knew the story, or if he simply recognized a storm when he saw one. You're ripping the family apart, she hissed, louder now. I leaned forward, steady. The rot was there long before the boards came up. Her face went pale, not with rage this time, but with something closer to disbelief. Like I'd used a word she didn't expect me to know. She stood suddenly, chair legs scraping loud against the floor. Her exit was fast, but not unnoticed. A couple seated by the counter turned to watch, eyebrows raised. A man in a beanie whispered something to his wife. I remained still, composed. Just a woman having coffee on Thanksgiving, alone but not lonely. When the bell above the door jingled again, I looked up expecting silence to follow. Instead, Eloise slipped inside, cheeks pink from the cold, hands wrapped around a small tin of cookies. She smiled as she reached my table, but didn't sit. You did what most of us wish we had the courage to do, she whispered, resting the tin beside my hand. Then she walked off toward the counter, ordering tea like it was any other day. I sat for a long while after Eloise left, watching the snow start to fall. Just a dusting, the kind that didn't stick but lingered long enough to remind you winter was already here, even if no one had bothered to say so. The tin of cookies sat untouched on the table. I wasn't hungry, not really, but I appreciated the gesture. She'd always known when someone needed a hand without asking for one. A part of me expected Savannah to return, to come back through the door, slamming it this time, and demand answers she already had. But she didn't. Maybe for once, she realized there were no more words that could bend me. I stepped out into the cold air, pulling my coat close, the wool heavy but comforting on my shoulders. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few bundled-up couples walking dogs and the occasional child dragging a red wagon too big for the sidewalk. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, everyone except me, and I was oddly at ease with that. Instead of returning to the inn, I took a detour past the old house. From the sidewalk, I could see faint shadows moving inside. Contractors, perhaps. Or maybe the new owners were already painting over the past. I didn't slow down. There was nothing left for me in those walls. Whatever memories still clung there, I'd already packed them away in quieter corners of my mind. Back at the inn, I settled into the small reading chair in the corner of my room. The lamp gave off a yellow light, the kind that made everything feel like it came from a Polaroid. I pulled out my journal, leather-bound, soft at the edges from years of thumbing pages. The pen slipped easily between my fingers, and I began to write, not because I had anything profound to say, but because stillness often brought thoughts too loud to ignore. Not every home has to hold a family, I wrote. Some are built to hold peace. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't meant to be. It was just true. For so long, I'd believed that sacrifice meant silence, that my job was to hold my breath so others could breathe more freely. But the truth was, I'd been disappearing by degrees, first in conversation, then in decisions, then in my own home, until I no longer recognized the rooms I walked through. I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't a victory. It was a reclamation of space, of voice, of self. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. No envelope, just Caleb's handwriting, unmistakably his even now. It read, "I didn't know. I should have. I'm sorry." I folded it once and tucked it into the back of my journal. I didn't need anything more. Not today. Later that afternoon, I met Eloise again, this time on the boardwalk where the breeze smelled like pine and salt. She handed me a paper cup of cider without a word. We sat in silence, letting the wind do most of the talking. Finally, she said, "So, what now?" I looked out over the water, the gray-blue waves lapping like they always had, constant, indifferent. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I'll rent a place in town. Maybe I'll move closer to my cousin in Vermont. Or maybe I'll just stay here until the snow thickens and tells me it's time to go." She nodded like that made all the sense in the world. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't wait for someone else to make the decision for me. That door, the one Savannah had always dreamed of unlocking, would never open for her, but I had found one of my own. And this time, I had the key. He showed up with no flowers, no gifts, just the look of a man who finally saw the price of silence. The knock on the door was softer than I expected. Not hesitant, exactly, just restrained, like someone unsure if they still had the right to knock at all. I had just pulled the cranberry compote from the fridge, the smell of cloves and orange peel still clinging to my hands. Outside, the evening was setting in, the kind of dim golden hour where the light made everything look gentler than it was. I opened the door, and there he stood. Caleb looked older than the last time I'd seen him. Older than 38, at least. His face had that washed-out quality of a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. His jacket was wrinkled at the collar, and he was clutching a set of car keys like they might keep him grounded. "Hi, Mom." 2 words, heavy enough to drop an anchor in the middle of my living room. I didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside and nodded for him to come in. He hesitated only a second, then walked through the doorway like someone returning to a childhood home that no longer quite fit. I had set the table for one, not out of bitterness, just a habit. A single plate, a fork and knife, a glass of cider that was still cool to the touch. On the stovetop, cornbread warmed slowly in a cast-iron pan, and the sweet potato casserole had just come out of the oven, browned perfectly along the edges. He noticed the table, then looked at me. I didn't mean to interrupt. "You didn't," I said, moving past him to the kitchen. "Are you hungry?" "I'm not sure," he said, but he sat down anyway. I plated the food without ceremony. 2 portions, no extra garnish, just what he used to like, the kind of dinner that said, "I remember." I set it in front of him, and we both sat, the silence stretching between us like an old quilt, familiar, worn, but still warm. He took a bite, chewed slowly. I watched the way he avoided my eyes. "She's angry," he said finally. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. "I figured," I replied. "She said you blindsided her." "She thought the house was hers," I said, lifting my fork. "It never was." He nodded, looking down at his food again. "She had plans." I gave a soft chuckle. So did I. The silence after that was thicker, not hostile, just honest. We ate for a few more minutes. The only sounds were the soft scrape of fork against plate and the ticking of the old wall clock above the mantel. "You know," I said, setting down my fork, "your father proposed to me on the front porch of that house." Caleb looked up, surprised. "I didn't know that." "No reason you would. You were always more interested in skipping stones than family stories." He gave a small smile. "That porch had good acoustics. I used to play guitar out there." "You did," I nodded. "Until you quit. Said it made your fingers hurt." He looked down again, as if the memories came with a weight he hadn't prepared for. "I kept that house," I continued, "through layoffs, hospital bills, and 2 busted water heaters. 3 jobs, Caleb. Library during the day, temp work at night, tutoring on weekends. He didn't respond. I leaned back slightly. I'm not telling you that to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because no one else ever knew. Not really. Your father worked hard, but when he got sick, it all came down to me. I should have asked more, he said quietly. You were busy building your own life. That's what kids are supposed to do. He looked up, eyes wet, but not spilling. You always made it look so easy. I didn't. You just weren't looking. That settled between us like dust. I reached for the cranberry compote, spooned a little onto his plate. He used to hate it as a kid. Now, he didn't protest. The heater hummed in the corner. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of someone dragging their trash bin to the curb. Life went on, as it always did, even when everything inside a home had shifted. He didn't speak again for a long while, just ate, slowly, the way someone eats when they don't want to finish because they don't know what comes after. When he finally pushed his plate slightly forward, he looked up at me, really looked, for the first time in what felt like years. I didn't know you were still working weekends back then. I didn't talk about it, but you shouldn't have had to do it alone. Sometimes we don't get to pick the load, just how we carry it. He rubbed a hand over his face, like trying to erase something only he could see. I let her talk me into things, he admitted. Things I knew didn't feel right, but I didn't want another fight. I thought, if I keep the peace, everything else will follow. That's a dangerous kind of silence, I said. It builds up, grows teeth. He nodded, the gesture slow, deliberate. She said you never really accepted her, that you wanted to keep everything yours. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands together. I accepted that you loved her. That was enough. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them rewrite your past or your future. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. She said the house was a burden, that it needed to be modernized, flipped, sold to someone who appreciated its potential. I raised an eyebrow. And you believed that? He didn't answer. Maybe that was enough to answer. The silence wasn't as thick now, just quiet, like the kind that lingers after truth has been spoken aloud and left to settle in the room. I saw the deed, he said softly. Your name only, always was. Yes, I should have read it, should have asked questions. Maybe, but you didn't. And now we're here. He stood then, walking slowly to the window. Outside, the street was empty. A few porch lights flickered on, yellow glows against the falling dusk. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then went quiet. I don't know what to say to her, he murmured. That's not my burden to carry. He turned, leaning against the frame of the window. You think she ever cared about the family? I think she cared about what the family could get her. He exhaled, the sound rough, full of things too tangled to name. And me? I think you got tired of choosing, so you stopped choosing at all. He didn't argue, just nodded. I rose, went to the kitchen, pulled out 2 Tupperware containers. I filled one with sweet potato casserole, the other with cornbread, labeled them both, pressed the lids shut with the ease of a ritual I hadn't realized I missed. When I handed them to him, he looked surprised. For later, I said, like old times. His fingers brushed mine as he took them, cold from the window, but still warm underneath. At the door, he paused. I looked back at the table, the half-empty plates, the single candle I'd lit out of habit more than atmosphere. I remember when we used to decorate the porch together, he said. You let me hang the lights, even though I always tangled them. You were so proud when you finally got them straight one year, I said. You insisted we keep them up until February. He laughed softly. It was the kind of laugh that curled inward, not quite ready to be free. At the door, he shifted, keys in one hand, Tupperware in the other. Then he asked it, "Will you come to Christmas dinner?" I looked at him for a long moment. Not past him, not through him, just at him. My son, the boy who used to bring me dandelions in his fists, the man who had let too much go unsaid for too long. "I'll think about it." It turns out you don't need a family around a table to be thankful. You just need truth and a little pie. The first real snow of December came quiet, like a memory slipping under the door. From my window at the modest rental on Harbor Street, I watched the roofs collect a thin layer of white. It didn't stay long. Bar Harbor snow never does. But it was enough to soften the sidewalks, enough to hush the town. That morning, I folded my scarf 3 times, like my mother taught me, and made my way to the library. The winter book circle met in the back reading room, a space that used to house the microfiche reels. I used to help students navigate those reels back when my wrist didn't ache and my patience was thinner. Now, I sat at the head of the circle, a pot of spiced tea steaming in front of me and 4 women, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, long-walked, settling into their chairs. Eloise was the first to speak, as always. "You still write on that old typewriter?" I smiled. Clacks louder than a thunderstorm, but it listens better than most people I've met. They chuckled, and I placed a few typed pages on the table. My fingers ran across the crisp edge of the paper. "I wrote something new last night. Not quite a story, maybe more of a memory." I read aloud, voice low, even. It wasn't about Savannah. Not directly. It was about the scent of my mother's hands after shelling peas, the ache behind my knees when I first scrubbed our kitchen floor. It was about women who held things together so long, they forgot what it felt like to let go. No one interrupted. When I finished, no one clapped. Just a soft silence. Warm, understanding. Hazel, a retired nurse, leaned forward. "Have you ever thought about publishing it? I don't think the world needs another book of reflections." Eloise stirred her tea. "Maybe not, but we do." That hit harder than I expected. Later, as we packed up, a familiar voice called from the front desk, "Miss Quinn, you have a letter." I hadn't expected mail. The holidays brought catalogs and bills, never envelopes with hand-addressed script. But there it was. My name, my rental address, Caleb's handwriting, still uneven, still halfway between cursive and apology. I didn't open it right away, just tucked it in my coat pocket and walked 2 blocks to Bay's Edge. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and lemon zest. The holiday pie selection sat proudly in the case. Pecan, apple, something with cranberries. I ordered a slice of sweet potato pie and a cappuccino. The server, a new girl with chipped purple nails, didn't call me Miss Quinn like the last one did, just nodded and smiled. That was fine by me. At a corner table, I pulled out the letter and opened it slowly. "Mom, I don't have the words for what I should have said weeks ago, maybe years ago. Thank you for not yelling when you had every right to. I'm still learning. Love, Caleb." No excuses. No explanations. Just that. I folded the letter back into its envelope, finished my pie, and walked home before the snow turned to slush. I didn't cry. I didn't call him, but I put the letter on the sill above the kitchen sink, next to the rosemary plant that never seemed to die. That evening, I pulled the typewriter toward me again. The keys felt lighter this time. I wrote about women who tell the truth without needing to shout, women who find clarity in quiet places. I didn't name names, but the story was mine. Eloise noticed my silence and didn't press. She'd always known how to leave space for people to come back to themselves. We sat there in the library's small reading room, the heater purring in the corner, casting waves of warmth over our knees, the windows fogged slightly from our breath, and the tea. Outside, snow drifted down in no hurry to finish what it had started. A woman named May, soft-spoken and fond of old romances, shared something about losing her sister last spring. I listened, really listened, not out of obligation, but because I had room now, inside myself, to carry someone else's memory. We passed the tin of ginger cookies around in silence, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache. I looked around that circle of women, all with silvering hair and tired but determined hands. There was no pretense in that room, no one performing the part of daughter-in-law, mother, or hostess. Just women who had seen enough winters to know which truths were worth holding. Later, when the others had gone and Eloise lingered to stack chairs, I reached into my tote and pulled out a small envelope. I hadn't told her yet. Caleb had written. Not long, and certainly not flowery. Just a page, his handwriting unsteady like he wasn't sure if he had the right to be reaching out. "Thank you," it said, "for not yelling when you had every right to. I'm still learning." That was all. I handed it to Eloise, who read it quietly and nodded. She didn't say anything like, "See, he's coming around," or "Maybe things will be like before." She just said, "I'm glad he wrote." And I was too, but I didn't write back. Not yet. Some things needed to settle inside you before you could speak to them. That evening, I walked back to the inn where I was staying through streets glazed with thin ice. Every porch was strung with lights now, glowing in red and green and a stubborn bit of blue. I passed a group of teenagers carrying sleds, their laughter skipping ahead of them into the night. For a moment, I imagined Caleb at that age, scuffing his boots, cheeks red, trying to hide his smile from me. Inside the cottage, I lit the fireplace and warmed the leftover slices of banana bread I'd made for the cafe earlier. The scent filled the room, comforting, familiar. I sat down at my little writing desk by the window, where I'd left the typewriter Eloise gave me, ribbon still good, keys still smooth. I placed fresh paper in it, rolled it in, and paused. It wasn't that I had something urgent to say. I just knew that I could say it now, that the voice I'd spent years muffling in politeness, in sacrifice, in maternal duty, was still here, a little older, a little wiser, and no longer willing to fold into the corners of other people's decisions. I typed a single line. This isn't a story about a house. It's about the woman who learned to live outside it. Then I folded the paper neatly and placed it beside the others in the folder marked Winter Notes. I didn't know if it would ever become a book, maybe just a collection of thoughts for no one but myself. But that was enough. Outside, the snow kept falling, not heavy, just steady, the kind of snow that stuck and softened everything it touched. I stood by the window and watched a family walk past, a couple with 2 young kids tugging on their sleeves, pointing to the lights, giggling. I didn't feel envy, only calm. For a long time, I believed that family meant keeping quiet, giving way, making room even when there was none left for you. But now I know. It's not blood or obligation that keeps you warm in the coldest months. It's truth, and maybe a little pie. I sold the house, yes, but I kept something better, the part of me they thought was long gone. They say peace is quiet, but I've learned it's more than that. It's the way your breath slows when you know no one's rushing you anymore. The way coffee tastes different when you're not swallowing bitterness with every sip. Since selling the house, life has softened in the best possible ways. I wake up early, just like always. But now the silence feels like mine. No footsteps stomping above me. No clatter of plans being made behind closed doors. Just the hum of the kettle, the rustle of pages, and the occasional squawk of a gull far off near the shore. I rented a little place not far from the library. 2 rooms, 1 porch, a creaky screen door that swings just right in the wind. The landlord is a widower named Frank, who leaves me apples from his orchard every week and says I remind him of someone who once read too many books. He's not wrong. The first snowfall came early this year. I watched it settle gently on the railings outside as I typed the last line of a new essay. The typewriter Eloise gave me hums like an old friend with secrets. Funny how reclaiming something as simple as your voice can feel like planting your feet in fresh earth. On Wednesdays, I host the Winter Book Circle down at the library. It's not fancy, just a few of us women, most over 60, some over 70, gathering with thick cardigans and thermoses of tea. We read stories, some fiction, some memoir, and now and then, I read something of mine. They listen with eyes that see more than words. Sometimes they nod. Sometimes they just hold my hand after. That's all I need. Savannah left town, or so I hear. No farewell, no fireworks, just gone. Caleb still lives here, though. We don't talk often. But now and then, a letter arrives. Always handwritten, always short. The last one said, "I'm trying to be the kind of man who notices when people stop smiling." That's something, I suppose. Growth often starts where guilt leaves off. But this story isn't about them, not anymore. For a long time, I thought love meant giving everything, your time, your space, even your voice, especially your voice. I confused sacrifice with devotion, though silence was kindness, thought endurance was strength. But here's the truth. I wish someone had whispered to me decades ago, if you give so much that you disappear, even the people who love you may forget you were ever there. And I was there, every holiday, every scraped knee, every forgotten birthday party I still managed to make special. I was there for meals, late-night calls, and holding things together when they wanted to fall apart. But being there doesn't mean being invisible. Not anymore. So I've started reclaiming the little things. I bought myself a red scarf. Bold, warm, not meant to blend in. I visit the market and chat with vendors like I'm someone who has all the time in the world. I bake banana bread for the cafe once a month. The owner says it reminds him of his mother. I take that as a quiet honor. Eloise and I still meet on Sundays. Sometimes we just sit in her living room, watching old black and white movies with the sound off. She knits. I journal. We don't need many words between us. Some friendships age like oak, slow to grow, but steady in storms. I don't think I've changed as much as I've returned to myself, like brushing dust off an old painting and realizing the colors are still vibrant underneath. It's not about revenge. It was never about winning. It was about not losing any more of myself. That beach house had good bones. That's what Savannah said. But what I finally understood is this. It wasn't just the house. I have good bones too. I've held up families. I've supported generations. And I'm still standing. I'll never regret the love I gave. But I no longer confuse being needed with being valued. Those are two different things. One leaves you empty. The other fills you quietly from within. So if you're listening to this, maybe curled up somewhere warm, maybe alone, maybe wondering if you've done too much for too little, let me tell you this. It's never too late to come home to yourself, not to the version others expect, but to the woman you were before the noise, the one who hummed when she cooked, the one who wrote letters she never sent, the one who held firm, even when her hands shook. You don't need a whole table of people to be thankful. Sometimes you just need the truth. And a little pie. If this story found its way into your heart, maybe share it with someone who needs it too. Someone quietly carrying more than they ever say. And remember, dignity isn't loud, but once you find it, you never lose it again.